A millionaire forced his daughter to marry the humble gardener to punish her, however. He was stunned by what she did. Part 2. Though small and unassuming, the simplicity surrounding her was everything Sophia Parker had once scorned. Yet, against her expectations, she found herself questioning whether there might be more to life than the constant chase for thrills and status that had defined her world. Her mind drifted back to a conversation she'd had with Albert recently, when he suggested gently, yet firmly, that there could be something worth appreciating in this quieter existence. At the time, she'd laughed off his words, but now maybe he'd been onto something. Perhaps there was a lesson in the calmness of this life. But that thought opened up unsettling questions. If this simplicity held value, what did that say about the life she'd lived before? Had all those years, built on luxuries and prestige, been shallow and empty? Sophia shook her head, trying to push aside the thought. This was too much to process now. She had always been a woman who found purpose in luxury and status, someone who chased after the finer things with determination. And yet, here she was, standing in Athena House, realizing that maybe those things weren't as meaningful as she once believed. The thought of confronting her father brought a mix of fear and resolve. Franklin Parker was a towering presence, literally and figuratively, whose authority had ruled every room and every decision in her life. Growing up, she'd learned that challenging him was never without consequences, and this marriage had been his ultimate show of control. But now, in the stillness of Athena House, Sophia felt a new strength bubbling within her. She was done living under his rules and done with the leash he'd placed around her life. She grabbed her jacket and set out for the stars, the sprawling Parker estate. Each step felt weighted, the path winding through Wind Valley Chardyard like a maze of greens and golds. When she reached the front door, she paused, her hand hovering over the handle, memories of lavish parties and designer gowns, of living beneath her father's ironclad control, flickering through her mind. It had all seemed so vital once, but now it felt distant, like a memory from someone else's life. Drawing in a deep breath, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. As expected, Franklin was in his office, his usual command post, and she could hear the faint hum of his voice through the heavy wooden door, likely finishing up a business call. For a brief moment, Sophia considered waiting until he was done. But no. She was done waiting. She knocked once, then opened the door without invitation. Her father looked up, visibly surprised at her abrupt entrance. Seated behind his enormous oak desk, phone in hand, he raised his eyes at her, his irritation unmistakable. "Sophia," he began in that hard, clipped tone he reserved for serious matters, "I'm on a call. This had better be important." She crossed her arms, grounding herself. "It is." Franklin held up a finger, signaling her to wait while he concluded his call. She stood there, her jaw clenched, watching as he rattled off orders with his typical authority. This image of him, the unstoppable businessman, always controlling, had once intimidated her, but today she was ready to face him head-on. Finally, he ended the call, leaning back in his chair with a look that combined curiosity and annoyance. "What do you want, Sophia? I'm very busy." Taking a steadying breath, she replied, "We need to talk about this marriage arrangement." A flash of amusement crossed his eyes, and his expression shifted to one of challenge. "Ah, is my daughter finally ready to come to her senses? Thinking of an annulment?" Sophia shook her head, her voice calm but unwavering. "No, that's not why I'm here." His brow arched, clearly taken aback. "Then what? You've been in Athena House for weeks now. Surely it's not agreeing with you." "I didn't come to discuss what I like or don't like." Her voice held steady. "I came to tell you that I'm done letting you control me. You thought marrying me off to Albert would teach me a lesson, but it didn't work." Franklin's gaze turned dark, but he held his silence, letting her speak. Sophia stepped forward, her confidence growing with each word. "You thought this would be some kind of punishment," she continued, "but it's not. I've learned more about myself these past few weeks than I ever did under your control. I'm done letting you dictate my life." Slowly, Franklin rose from his chair, his presence looming over her as he locked his stern gaze on hers. "So, what exactly do you plan to do, Sophia? Run off with Albert and live out your fantasy?" His voice dripped with disdain. Sophia met his gaze without flinching. "Maybe I will. And if I do, it will be my choice, not yours." Franklin's jaw tightened, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You're making a fool's choice, throwing away everything I've built for you. This family has worked for generations to build a name, a legacy." Sophia didn't falter. "It's not your life to control, Dad. It's mine." The silence between them grew thick, the air charged with unspoken tension. She could see the conflict in his eyes, his desire to maintain control colliding with the harsh reality that he was losing his grip. "You've always been stubborn?" he said at last, his voice low and dangerous. "But don't forget who you're dealing with. I'm the one who made this family what it is. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me." Sophia shook her head, her expression calm. "You gave me everything except the freedom to choose my own path." For a moment, the weight of her words hung heavy in the room. She noticed something shift in her father's face, not anger, not disappointment, but a trace of regret, though fleeting. But Franklin was not one to surrender easily. He straightened, his tone turning colder. "You want freedom, Sophia? Fine. But don't expect me to be there when you realize the world out there isn't as easy as you think." Sophia nodded, her heart racing, yet her mind clearer than it had ever been. "I won't." Without another word, Sophia turned and left the office, leaving her father behind. As the door clicked shut, a strange wave of relief washed over her. The confrontation had been intense, but it was done. She had finally spoken her truth. And for the first time in years, Sophia felt she was in command of her own life. The encounter stirred a mix of emotions, anger, liberation, and an unexpected sense of freedom. She didn't yet know exactly what lay ahead, but one thing was clear: she wasn't returning to the life of luxury and control that Franklin Parker had crafted for her. When she arrived back at Athena House, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden light across Wind Valley Chardyard. Albert was outside, kneeling by a bed of flowers, his hands covered in dirt as he worked with quiet focus. Sophia stood watching him for a moment, feeling an unexpected calm settle over her. Weeks had passed since their arranged marriage, and though the beginning was awkward and tense, something between them had shifted. Albert's patience and quiet strength had surprised her, and over time she found herself appreciating the small acts of kindness he offered her. He never pushed, never demanded anything in return. As he looked up and noticed her, Albert wiped his hands on his jeans and greeted her softly. "You're back. How did it go?" Sophia sank onto the small stone bench by the garden and let out a deep sigh. "It was intense," she confessed, "but I finally told him what I needed to say." Albert nodded and joined her on the bench. "Good. It's been a long time coming." Sophia gave a faint smile, glancing at him. "You really think so?" "Yes," Albert replied, his voice both gentle and firm. "You've been carrying this for a while. It's good to finally get it off your chest." She leaned back, eyes drifting to the sky as it shifted from warm orange to soft pink. "I just don't know what happens next. I feel like I'm stuck between two lives, the one I had before, and this one. I'm not sure where I belong." Albert sat in thoughtful silence for a moment before answering. "Maybe you don't have to decide that just yet. Maybe you can just be." Sophia looked at him, taken aback by the simplicity of his words. "Just be?" He shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Yeah, life doesn't always need to be about big choices or knowing everything. Sometimes it's okay to just live, to see what comes." Sophia let the thought settle, her mind turning it over. She had always lived with a sense of urgency, needing control, needing to anticipate every outcome. But maybe Albert was right. Maybe for once, she didn't have to have all the answers. "I'm not used to that," she admitted, her tone softening. "Even when I went against my father, I was still chasing something." Albert leaned back, his arm brushing hers as they sat together in a comfortable silence. "I understand. But sometimes plans change. People change." Sophia felt her heart skip at his words, as if he'd echoed something deeply resonant within her. Over the past few weeks, she'd started to see Albert in a new way. He wasn't merely the gardener her father had chosen. He was kind, steady, and deeply genuine, qualities she hadn't realized she needed. For the first time, she really looked at him. There was a quiet strength in his rugged, unassuming face, in the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. More than anything, there was a warmth, a dependability that she'd come to lean on without even realizing it. "What about you?" she asked, shifting the conversation back to him. "Do you have a plan?" Albert chuckled, shaking his head. "I don't think I've ever had much of one. I like things simple, taking life as it comes." Sophia smiled, feeling an unexpected flutter in her chest. "That sounds nice." He met her gaze, his expression softening. "It can be." The air between them shifted, and for a moment, Sophia felt the world fall quiet around them. She hadn't planned to feel anything for Albert, but here she was, her heart racing at the way he looked at her. "Albert," she began, her voice uncertain about this marriage. He raised an eyebrow, encouraging her to continue. I know we didn't have a choice, she said slowly, choosing her words with care. And I know it hasn't been perfect, but I think I'm starting to see it differently. Albert didn't respond immediately, but his gaze softened as if he already understood what she was trying to say. Taking a deep breath, Sophia felt her pulse quicken. I guess what I'm trying to say is, maybe this doesn't have to feel like punishment. Maybe it can be something more. Albert's eyes softened, and for a moment, the only sound was the gentle rustling of the charred yard in the evening breeze. Then, he reached out and took her hand, his touch warm, steady. Is that what you want? He asked quietly. Sophia nodded, her heart pounding. Yes, I think it is. Albert's smile was small but sincere, and he gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Then we'll figure it out together. The simplicity of his words brought Sophia a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a very long time. There were still so many uncertainties, so much she hadn't yet sorted out, but for the first time, that didn't frighten her. She wasn't alone in this journey anymore. As the sun slipped beneath the horizon and the stars began to shine in the darkening sky, Sophia felt a new warmth grow inside her, one that had nothing to do with luxury or status. This was different. This was real. And for the first time, she felt that she was exactly where she was meant to be. In the days that followed, Sophia carried a new sense of clarity, though hints of doubt lingered. She had finally admitted to herself that her feelings for Albert were genuine, that maybe, just maybe, this unexpected marriage didn't have to be punishment she had once believed. With this realization, she knew it was time to make a decision, one that would shape her future completely. It was time to stand beside Albert, not as two individuals bound by her father's will, but as true equals, as partners. It wasn't a life she'd ever pictured for herself, but it was now the one she desired more than anything else. One early morning, as the sun rose over Wind Valley Chardyard, Sophia Parker sat on the porch of Athena House, her thoughts deep and swirling. She held a steaming cup of coffee, letting its warmth seep into her hands as she watched the world wake up around her. What once felt like a symbol of entrapment, the quiet, the simplicity, had transformed into something that felt almost like home. But Sophia knew she couldn't stay in this state of in-between forever. She had to take charge, to make the decision she'd been avoiding for too long. That afternoon, she found Albert in the garden, kneeling beside a bed of flowers, trimming the plants with his familiar care. Watching him work grounded her, even as her heart raced. Albert, she called softly, stepping closer. He looked up, a bit surprised but calm. Hey, he greeted, standing and wiping his hands on his jeans. Is everything all right? Sophia nodded, though her heart thudded in her chest. Yes, I need to talk to you. Albert's expression shifted, a mixture of curiosity and concern. Sure, what's on your mind? She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I've been thinking about us, about everything since the wedding. Albert stayed quiet, allowing her the space to speak. I know we didn't choose this, she continued, and at first, I hated it. I hated you, this place, everything. He offered a faint smile but said nothing. But now things feel different, Sophia went on. I don't feel trapped anymore. I don't feel like this is some kind of punishment. In fact, I think I might actually be happy here. Her words settled between them, heavy with meaning. Albert's eyes softened and he took a step closer. What are you saying, Sophia? She looked down, her heart racing. I'm saying, I want this. I want to be here with you, not because I was forced to, but because it's what I choose. Albert's expression was unreadable for a moment, as if he were absorbing her words. Then, slowly, a genuine smile spread across his face, making Sophia's heart flutter. You're serious? He asked, his voice soft and filled with hope. Sophia nodded, a sense of peace washing over her. Yes, I'm serious. In a sudden rush of emotion, he wrapped her in a hug, holding her tightly. Sophia closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his embrace and the steady beat of his heart against hers. I never thought I'd hear you say that, Albert murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Sophia laughed softly, pulling back just enough to look up at him. Neither did I. They stood there in peaceful silence. For the first time, Sophia felt truly at ease, no anger, no resentment, just the quiet certainty that this was where she was meant to be. After a while, Albert pulled back slightly, his hands still on her shoulders. So what does this mean? He asked, his tone curious. Sophia smiled, feeling excitement bubble within her. It means I want to make this real. I want to renew our vows on our own terms this time. Albert blinked, clearly taken aback. You mean? Sophia's smile widened. Yes, I want to marry you for real. For a moment, Albert was speechless. Then, with a grin, he pulled her into another hug, lifting her off the ground and spinning her in a circle. Sophia laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. When he set her down, his expression was filled with joy. I don't know what to say, he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. Just say yes, Sophia replied, her own smile growing. Albert laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. Yes, absolutely yes. They stood there in each other's arms, the chardyard around them a quiet witness to their moment. It was simple but perfect. For the first time, Sophia wasn't chasing anything. She had finally found what she needed. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, they walked hand in hand back to Athena House, talking about their future in a way they never had before. When they reached the porch, Sophia turned to Albert with a smile that felt as though it came from deep within her. Tomorrow, she said softly. Let's do it tomorrow. Albert nodded, his eyes shining. Tomorrow. The warm, golden light of the setting sun cast a glow over them, and Sophia knew she had made the right choice. The day following Sophia's decision felt like a fresh start, but not everyone welcomed the news. Franklin Parker had always believed his control and influence could shape his daughter's life, but the past few weeks had shattered that certainty. Sitting in his office at the Stars, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and success, he couldn't understand why Sophia hadn't fought harder to escape. Instead, she'd chosen to stay and, even worse, planned to renew her vows with Albert of her own will. The thought enraged him. How could his daughter willingly choose a life he deemed beneath her? His thoughts were interrupted by Emma, his assistant, standing in the doorway. Mr. Parker, she began cautiously, your daughter is here to see you. Franklin composed himself, masking his emotions. Send her in. Sophia entered, standing taller and more self-assured than he'd ever seen her. It unsettled him. Sophia, Franklin said, his tone clipped. What brings you here? She took a steadying breath. I'm here to tell you that I'm renewing my vows with Albert. Franklin's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to remain calm. So I've heard. And what exactly do you expect me to say to that? I'm not asking for your permission, Sophia replied, her voice unwavering. I'm here because I think you deserve to know. But this is my life. And I'm choosing how to live it. His eyes narrowed, his temper flaring. So you're choosing to throw everything away? I'm not throwing anything away, Sophia said, her voice calm and resolute. I'm choosing a life that makes me happy, a life where I get to be myself. And what about the life I built for you? Franklin demanded, his voice rising. The wealth, the opportunities, everything I've worked for, are you just going to walk away from it all? Sophia held his gaze, unwavering. You built that life for yourself, Dad, not for me. I never asked for any of it. The words hit Franklin Parker like a cold slap. He had always believed that everything he did was for Sophia, that all his hard work, every success, was for her benefit. But now, standing before her, he realized that he had never truly considered what she wanted, only what he thought she should want. You're making a mistake, Franklin said, his voice dangerously low. Albert is beneath you. He'll never be able to give you the life you deserve. Sophia shook her head, a small, sad smile on her lips. That's where you're wrong. Albert is exactly what I need. He's kind, steady, and he loves me for who I am, not for what I have. Franklin's hands clenched into fists. You think love is enough? You think you can live on love alone? You're being naive, Sophia. I'm being happy, she replied, her voice more confident than he had ever heard it. And I'm not going to let you take that away from me. The room fell silent, a thick tension settling between them. Franklin stared at his daughter, his mind racing, feeling his control slipping through his fingers. For the first time, a foreign emotion crept into his heart, fear that he had lost her for good. I love you, Dad, Sophia said softly, her tone softening. But I need to live my own life now. I hope someday you'll understand that. Without another word, she turned and walked out of his office, leaving him alone in silence, facing the painful realization of what his control had cost him. Underscore 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 underscore. The day Sophia had longed for finally arrived, carrying with it a quiet sense of clarity. As the sun began to rise over Wind Valley Chardyard, casting a soft, golden light over the rows of grapevines, the air was cool and still. Today felt different from her original wedding day back then. It had felt like a punishment. Today it felt like freedom. This time she was making her own choice. Standing before a small mirror in Athena House, Sophia adjusted her simple white dress. It wasn't the grand gown she once imagined for herself, but it was perfect, a reflection of the life she was about to embrace, a life defined by love and authenticity, not luxury or status. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Sophia's heart fluttered with anticipation. The last few weeks had been filled with moments of self-reflection, of growth, of discovering happiness in the simplest things. Albert had shown her what that could look like, not by trying to change her, but simply by being himself, a steady, kind presence. As she stepped outside, she saw Albert waiting, dressed in a simple suit, his hair neatly combed. His gaze was calm and full of love, but today there was something deeper in his eyes. "You look beautiful," he said softly, his smile warm and genuine. Sophia felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. You look pretty good yourself." They shared a quiet moment, the weight of their journey settling between them like a shared secret. This wasn't just a renewal of vows, it was a new beginning, one they were choosing together. "Ready?" Albert asked, extending his hand. Sophia slipped her hand into his, nodding. More than ever. Together, they walked to a small clearing in the Chardyard where the ceremony would take place. It was a simple setting, a few chairs, a wooden arch adorned with wildflowers, and rows of grapevines stretching out as far as they could see. There were no guests, no grand celebration, just the two of them, standing side by side, ready to commit on their own terms. For the first time in her life, Sophia didn't care about the absence of an audience or any lavish details. This was real. And it was everything she wanted. As the officiant began, Sophia felt waves of emotion wash over her. She glanced at Albert, who held her gaze with that steady, reassuring look, and she felt the truth of their journey. They had started as strangers bound by obligation, but today they stood as equals bound by choice. When it came time for her vows, Sophia took a deep breath and turned to Albert, her heart pounding as she spoke. "Albert," she began, her voice soft but steady. "When we first married, I didn't understand what love was. I thought happiness meant wealth, status, and approval. But you've shown me it's not about what you have, it's about who you share your life with. You've taught me more about love, kindness, and patience than I ever thought possible. Today, I choose you not because I have to, but because I want to. I choose you as my partner, my friend, and my love for the rest of my life." Albert's eyes shone with emotion, and when he spoke, his voice was filled with a tenderness that made Sophia's heart ache in the most beautiful way. "Sophia," he said, keeping his gaze fixed on her. "I never expected this, especially not the way it happened. But from the moment we started this journey, I knew there was something special about you. You're strong, determined, and so full of life. Every day you've shown me that love isn't about grand gestures or material things. It's about the quiet moments when it's just us. I choose you, Sophia. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that. I'm so grateful to be standing here with you, knowing this is just the beginning of our story." Tears filled Sophia's eyes as the officiant smiled and pronounced them husband and wife once again. There was no applause, no crowd, but that didn't matter. This moment was perfect. Albert leaned in and kissed her softly, and Sophia felt a sense of completeness settle over her. This was her life now, a life she had chosen. Hand in hand, they walked back through the Chardyard, the golden light of the setting sun casting long shadows across the ground. Sophia looked up at Albert, her heart brimming with love and gratitude. "I never thought I'd find this," she whispered, resting her head on his shoulder. Albert smiled, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Neither did I." They walked in contented silence, the peaceful sounds of the Chardyard surrounding them. Words were unnecessary, they both understood the significance of this day. A fresh start. A promise of a future filled with love, joy, and the simple beauty of life together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sophia looked out over the Chardyard, feeling the warmth of Albert's hand in hers. For the first time in her life, she felt deeply, beautifully, exactly where she was meant to be. One crisp morning, while Sophia was straightening up Athena House, she came across a folded, elegant business magazine on the small coffee table in the living room. She hadn't seen it before, nor had she remembered Albert ever bringing one inside. Intrigued, she opened it, only to have her breath catch in her throat. There, on a double-page spread, was a profile of Albert dressed in a sharp suit, his familiar steady gaze softened by an almost imperceptible smile. "Albert Hayes, the billionaire you never see," read the headline. Her heart pounded as she scanned the words, which painted a picture of a man entirely different from the one she thought she knew. Albert was not only wealthy, he was richer than her father, Franklin, with investments spanning real estate, technology, and even parts of the agriculture industry. He'd left the boardroom for a quieter life, the article explained, choosing to pursue a life far removed from the glitz and glamour of his vast empire. Sophia felt the room close in around her. Her hands shook as she placed the magazine down. She thought of the Albert she knew, the humble gardener, the quiet man who seemed content to live simply. How much of it had been an act? Her mind raced with questions she could hardly grasp, each one forming a web of confusion, disbelief, and somewhere deep within a simmering anger. Lost in her thoughts, she hardly noticed Albert entering until his voice broke the silence. "Sophia? Are you okay?" He took a step closer, his brow furrowing in concern. She turned to him, her face pale, holding up the magazine. "Care to explain this?" Albert's face froze, and a shadow of realization fell over his expression. He opened his mouth as if to say something but stopped, his gaze shifting from the magazine to her eyes. "I can explain," he began softly. Sophia swallowed, her voice shaky yet firm. "I think you'd better." He took a deep breath, stepping closer but stopping as he saw her draw back instinctively. "I didn't plan for you to find out this way, Sophia." "So you were planning on hiding it from me forever?" Her voice was tight, her anger bubbling beneath the surface. "No," Albert replied, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "I was going to tell you, but I didn't know how." "You're a billionaire," she said, incredulous. "All this time I thought you were this simple, kind, down-to-earth man, and now it turns out you're richer than my father, that I lied?" He interrupted, his voice laced with regret. "Yes, I suppose it must feel that way. But you have to understand, I never wanted you to see me for what I owned or what people think I am. I wanted you to know me, just me." Sophia clenched her fists, struggling to contain the emotions threatening to spill over. "But you made me believe that you were someone else, Albert. That you were living this simple life, that we were in this together. You've been living a lie right next to me." Albert's expression softened, his eyes reflecting his own pain. "Sophia, please, just let me explain." "Then explain," she snapped, her voice wavering. He took a deep breath, exhaling slowly before speaking. "I wanted to step away from the life I'd been living. It was exhausting, and I had lost sight of what mattered. I came here to Wind Valley to remember what it felt like to work, to create something with my hands, to live simply without the weight of expectations and the loneliness that comes with that world." Sophia's gaze softened for a moment, but her confusion and hurt remained. "Why this vineyard, Albert? Why our vineyard? Out of all the places you could have gone, why did you come here?" He looked away, his voice barely above a whisper. Because I knew you would be here." Sophia's heart pounded. "What are you saying?" Albert turned back to her, his gaze steady, his voice filled with emotion. "I've known you longer than you realize, Sophia. Years ago, I saw you at a fundraiser. You were there with your father, and you looked lonely, just like me. You had that same look in your eyes, like you were searching for something. I never forgot that moment. And then, when I found out your family owned Wind Valley, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could." "You could what?" "Walk in here and play the humble gardener until I fell for you?" She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Albert, this feels like a betrayal. I thought I could trust you. I thought you were real." He stepped closer, his face etched with desperation. "Sophia, I am real. This is who I am. The life I've built here, the man I've tried to become, all of it is real. But I didn't want you to see me as a billionaire. I wanted you to see me, to love me, without any of the noise or assumptions that money brings." "But it's not that simple," she whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You let me believe in something that wasn't true. You took my pain, my anger at my father, and used it as a way to make me yours." Albert's face fell. "That's not true. I didn't mean to hurt you, Sophia. All I wanted was for you to know me without the barriers that money brings." "But you built those barriers yourself, Albert," she replied, voice breaking. "You chose to hide this part of yourself, knowing that someday I'd have to face the truth." He paused, guilt flashing across his face. I thought it would be different, that when the time came you'd understand, that it wouldn't matter. Sophia drew a shaky breath, crossing her arms as if to shield herself. You don't get to decide when that truth comes out, Albert. That was my choice to make. And you took it from me. Albert's eyes softened, his voice barely a whisper. Sophia, please, I love you. She shook her head, stepping back. I don't know if I can believe that. You've been hiding such a huge part of yourself. I don't even know who you are anymore. The silence between them felt insurmountable, filled with the weight of unsaid words and broken trust. Albert looked at her, his heart clearly breaking, but he stayed quiet, as though respecting her need for space. Finally he spoke, his voice filled with quiet pain. Is there anything I can do to make this right? Sophia bit her lip, unsure of her answer. Part of her wanted to run, to put as much distance between them as possible, while another part longed for the warmth of his embrace. She closed her eyes, her voice strained as she replied, I don't know, Albert. I don't know if you can. She turned away, the weight of their conversation pressing down on her like a physical burden. She felt the tears she'd been holding back finally slip free, and she didn't look back as she made her way inside Athena House, leaving Albert standing alone in the early morning light. In the days that followed, Sophia kept her distance from Albert, needing time to sort through the tangle of emotions his revelation had unleashed. She spent her days wandering the charred yard, avoiding places where she might run into him, as memories of their time together played endlessly in her mind. Albert tried to reach out, leaving notes and flowers by her door, each one carefully worded, but she left them untouched. She couldn't bring herself to confront him, nor could she bring herself to move past the anger she felt. The betrayal lingered, poisoning the memories of their quiet moments together. One evening, as she stood by the rows of vines, watching the sunset cast long shadows over the hills, she heard footsteps approaching. Turning, she saw Albert, his face shadowed but his gaze intent. I know I'm the last person you want to see, he said quietly, stopping a few paces away. But I can't stand this silence anymore. I need to tell you everything. She looked at him, her eyes weary but unyielding. What more could you possibly have to say, Albert? I know you're rich. I know you deceived me. What else is there? He took a deep breath, searching for the right words. I want you to know that, despite everything, my feelings for you are real. I never meant to manipulate you. I came here because I needed to know if I could be someone you could love, without the trappings of my wealth. Sophia's face softened, her anger flickering into something more vulnerable. And now that I know, what do you expect me to do? Just accept it and pretend none of this happened. No, he said quietly, his voice filled with resignation. I don't expect anything. I needed you to know the truth. I understand if you never want to forgive me, if you need time, or even if you choose to walk away. But I couldn't live with myself if I didn't give you the choice. They stood in silence, the distance between them feeling as vast as the life he'd hidden from her. Sophia looked down, her heart aching with confusion and longing. Part of her yearned to take his hand to tell him she could forgive him, but the wound was still fresh, and the trust that had once bound them felt broken. Finally, she looked up, her gaze steady. I don't know if I can forgive you, Albert. Maybe someday. But not now. Albert nodded, accepting her words with quiet grace. I understand, and whatever you decide, I'll be here waiting. He turned to leave, and for a brief moment, Sophia wanted to call out, to tell him she would try, that she wanted to rebuild. But as he disappeared into the shadows of the charred yard, she knew she needed time to heal, to reconcile, and perhaps, to find her way back to him in her own time. Sophia Parker sat in her father's study, her hands still trembling from the whirlwind of emotions that had overwhelmed her since learning about Albert's true identity. Her father, Franklin Parker, a composed, wise man with a calm smile and perceptive eyes, looked up from his book as she entered, immediately sensing the turmoil within her. Sophia, what's on your mind? His voice, deep and reassuring, had always brought her comfort, a grounding warmth that she needed now more than ever. Sophia swallowed, feeling the weight of her discovery settle heavily on her heart. Dad, I just found out something that's difficult to wrap my head around. Franklin set his book aside, his full attention on her now. Take your time, sweetheart. I'm here to listen. Sophia drew a shaky breath, then began her story, recounting every moment she'd shared with Albert, from the first spark of charm he'd shown, to the peaceful days spent side by side at Wind Valley Chardyard. She described his humility, his quiet nature, and how she had come to care for him deeply. Her voice grew softer as she spoke about the discovery of his true wealth and status, the magazine article, and the overwhelming confrontation that followed. When she finally finished, her father leaned back thoughtfully, carefully processing her words. "And now I don't know what to think," Sophia whispered, her voice breaking. "I feel betrayed. He was so genuine to me, so grounded. And now it feels like I was caught in a lie. Why didn't he just tell me, Dad?" Franklin exhaled deeply, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I can understand why you feel this way, Sophia, but I believe there's more to this story than you might realize." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" A gentle smile crossed her father's face. "What if I told you that I knew who Albert was all along?" Sophia's eyes widened in shock. "You knew?" Franklin nodded, his gaze understanding and calm. "Yes, I knew that Albert was wealthy, even before he arrived here. In fact, he reached out to me before he ever set foot on our vineyard." Sophia felt a swirl of emotions, confusion, surprise, and somehow a pang of betrayal all over again. "Why didn't you tell me, Dad?" "You knew. And you kept it from me." He sighed, his tone tender yet firm. "Because, Sophia, I wanted you to learn something valuable. I wanted you to get to know Albert for who he truly is, not for his wealth or status. I thought that if you could see him without the burden of his fortune overshadowing him, you'd understand what he holds dear." Sophia's mind reeled. "But he still lied, Dad. He kept such a huge part of himself from me." "Yes, he did," Franklin acknowledged gently. "But he likely did so because he feared his wealth would drive a wedge between you, as it often has with others in his life." He took a pause. "Albert and I had a deep conversation before he joined us here. He shared that he was looking for something real, something that wasn't colored by his wealth. He wanted a chance to live honestly, to experience a life where he could simply be himself." Sophia lowered her gaze, absorbing her father's words. She had always seen Albert as authentic, kind, and gentle, and yet his hidden truth had hurt her deeply. "So, you believe he did it for honesty's sake?" Franklin nodded. "I think he did it to find something he could hold close, something real that wasn't influenced by money or power." Sophia took a deep breath, feeling a shift inside. But why would he go through all of that? To live such a humble life? Franklin leaned forward, his eyes soft with understanding. "When you're born into a world of wealth, Sophia, you often spend your life wondering if anyone truly sees you. Albert has spent his years surrounded by people who only saw him as a means to an end. Coming here, living simply, working on the vineyard, these were his ways of searching for authenticity. He wanted to find someone who would care for him as he is, not for what he has." A tear slipped down Sophia's cheek, and she quickly brushed it away. "He could have just told me, though. I would have understood." "Would you?" Franklin asked gently. "Think carefully, Sophia. If he had come here and introduced himself as Albert Hayes, billionaire, would you have let yourselves get close to him so easily?" She paused, the truth settling uncomfortably in her heart. I don't know. Maybe not. But it still hurt, Dad." "I know it did, sweetheart," he said, pulling her into a comforting hug. "But remember, love isn't always about what's said or done. Sometimes it's about understanding the motives behind those actions. Albert didn't lie to deceive you. He did it to protect something fragile and precious to him. He's human, and humans make mistakes, especially when they're afraid of losing what they care about." Sophia took a deep breath, letting her father's words sink in. A newfound clarity began to emerge, blending with the hurt and confusion. "So, you think he truly cares about me?" Franklin gave her a gentle smile. "I do. And I believe he's willing to risk everything just to be near you, even if it meant living a life completely outside of his comfort zone." Sophia nodded, warmth spreading through her heart. Her father was right. She needed to face Albert not with anger but with honesty, to fully understand his intentions and perhaps to find forgiveness. That evening, Sophia found herself standing outside Albert's modest cottage on the grounds of Wind Valley Chardyard. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the rows of grapevines, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself before knocking on the door. After a brief moment, Albert opened the door, his face a mixture of surprise and hope. "Sophia? Can we talk?" she asked softly, her voice revealing the vulnerability she felt. He nodded, stepping aside to let her in. They sat down in the cozy living room, silence filling the space before Sophia finally spoke. "Albert, I spoke with my father." Albert's gaze sophened and he nodded as though he had expected this. "I see. Did he tell you about me? Yes, she replied, holding his gaze. He told me about your conversation before you came here, about why you wanted to live a simpler life. Albert sighed, looking down at his hands. I'm sorry, Sophia. I never wanted to hurt you. I needed to know that someone could see me for me, not for my wealth. I wanted to experience a connection that wasn't tainted by money. Sophia placed her hand over his. I think I understand that now, Albert. But you need to know, finding out this way was painful. I felt like everything between us was a lie. Albert met her gaze, his eyes filled with regret. I know. And if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I love you, Sophia. That's why I wanted to be here, to live life with you as authentically as possible, free of the burdens my wealth often brings. Sophia's heart softened as she looked into his eyes, seeing the depth of sincerity there. She took a deep breath, allowing her heart to open as she spoke. Albert, I've realized that. I love you too. And maybe that's why this hurts so much. Because I thought I had lost something real. But maybe I can learn to trust you again. Albert's face brightened with hope, and he gently squeezed her hand. Thank you, Sophia. That's all I could ever hope for. They sat quietly, a sense of peaceful understanding settling between them. Sophia rested her head on Albert's shoulder, feeling a calmness she hadn't felt in days. She knew that their journey together wouldn't be without challenges, but she also knew that love was worth every effort. As they watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting Wind Valley in hues of pink and orange, Sophia felt a renewed sense of hope. Albert might have come from a world of wealth, but here, in the peaceful beauty of the vineyard, he had found a home in her heart, and she knew without question that they would face whatever the future held together, building a love as true and enduring as the land they both cherished.